Time for a fresh commitment to environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. Amy Brachio is Global Business Consulting Leader with EY. Hello, Amy.
Hi, how are you?
Great. And thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me on what is really a very topical subject right now. I'm just wondering, though, if you view the current climate as an opportunity for supply chain leaders to take stock and refocus their attention on ESG.
I do. I think that, through the lens of the nature of the work I do, consulting, I get to see trends and how they're moving through with respect to what our clients are asking us for help with. And so for quite some time, we've been getting asked for help from a point of view perspective. Where do we see things heading? Where do we see things going? What are others doing? And now organizations are really making a push for true transformation that drives greater sustainability into their business with a focus on those topics you're talking about, the environment, society, as well as governance. And I think heads of supply chain have such an important role to play as it comes to bringing that to life for their organization and really driving that meaningful change.
And the C-suite is understanding that. They're understanding that the supply chain is a key solution to the whole issue of ESG compliance.
I think that's right. And so, we're seeing this push for greater focus on ESG coming from a number of different directions. You see regulatory change coming out of Europe. You see regulatory change likely coming in the US. And you see changing sentiments with respect to what key stakeholder groups expect. And that's employees and it's consumers. And it doesn't stop within the four walls, so to speak, of the organization. The consumer expectations are looking for not only what a business does, but what those suppliers and vendors for the business do as well, and how that contributes. Yeah. And so heads of supply chain are right in the middle of all that. And I think the C-suite is quite aware.
Isn't the big challenge, though, that just the term ESG incorporates so much, not just environmental sustainability, but also human rights, workers' rights, and visibility of supply chain, how you're treating your people and how you're treating the environment. That seems like a lot to bite off at once, and yet it's not an impossible challenge, you think?
You're certainly right. And I think, when we talk about ESG and we talk about sustainability, part of it is wrapping your arms around just how broad the topic is and what's included in it. I found that looking at the 17 goals set out for sustainability by the United Nations helped me wrap my head around just how broad this is, as well as how interrelated. If you're not solving the societal issues, you're also not able to solve the environmental issues, and they just go hand in hand. And so I think organizations need to grapple with the fact that this is broad and it goes beyond the scope of what any one individual or function can do, but it really takes the organization as a whole to be committed to addressing this.
Okay, let's talk about some possible solutions, though. How can companies incorporate transparent ESG metrics?
Yes, so it starts from having clarity around your commitment. And we're seeing more and more organizations put into place clear commitments with respect to either decarbonization, reduction of their carbon footprint, and also societal goals. In the US, we're seeing a lot with respect to racial equity. And so first you have to have that commitment. Then you need to go through and determine how you're going to measure it. And I think it's hard to say, but the simpler you can get and the more understandable, the better. There are more frameworks that are coming out to help with these metrics. The World Economic Forum has one that we've been closely engaged with that many organizations are adopting, but there are others out there as well. Identifying those metrics that matter and then measuring them and being transparent in how you let your stakeholders know how you're doing against your progress.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe that's so important, the metrics aspect of it, because we hear so many companies want to tell us how, quote unquote, committed they are to these issues. We hear it all the time. The question is, how are they following through on that commitment? How can we trust them? How can they gain trust with customers, with their employees, with investors? How can they show that they're actually walking the walk?
Yeah, trust is so critically important. And what we're seeing is that more and more it's an expectation of a brand. So we do a future consumer index. And in our most recent one, we saw that 54% of global consumers feel authenticity and honesty are extremely important with respect to a brand.
Really? More than
and
half?
that means,
That's good.
yeah, that means you've got to have that transparency that you talked about. And so the question that organizations need to ask themselves is, how do you drive that trust? At the simplest level, I think it's that you don't have a gap between what you say and what you do. And you need to make sure that that trickles through the organization as a whole. So in recent conversations, two things really struck me. So I'll share these with you. One, I was talking to a board member about how she looks at the culture within the organization, because the culture and the trust are inextricably linked. She says she starts with the tone at the top, and I think that's one that we're all familiar with, but she doesn't stop there. She likes to look at the tone at the top, the mood in the middle, and the buzz at the bottom, and making sure that what that tone at the top is set is actually working its way through the organization. And if middle management doesn't believe in it, or those that are executing on a day-to-day basis don't believe in it, then you're not going to be very effective. And you've got to weave the culture in at all those levels. The next is you've got to create an environment in which people are comfortable bringing problems forward. And so if you look to the energy sector and how they look at risk management, if something goes wrong in the energy sector, it can mean life and death, right? And one of the things that they look at is you embrace the red and you challenge the green. So when you get a report, and we're all used to looking at these, normally we hone in and really interrogate where problems are brought forward, and no one wants to mark anything red because they know that they're going to get interrogated. And the green we sort of ignore. And the idea is that you flip that, right? That you look at the red on the report and you celebrate those who are willing to bring forward the real challenges so that you can solve them. And where everything is green, you challenge that to make sure that it really is as good as they're saying it is. And if you create that environment, you're going to identify the areas where you have problems and are able to fix them. If you don't create an environment in which people are comfortable bringing problems forward, you're not going to know what's really happening. And that's where you're going to erode the trust of your stakeholders.
But what determines whether it's red, green, yellow, whatever, is the input that you're getting, the information that's coming at you that allows you to make these assessments. Where's that information coming from? Are suppliers self-reporting? Are you having to monitor your suppliers and your supply chain yourself? Who's calculating your carbon footprint in order to, I mean, these are, where do the inputs come from?
Those are great questions. And they, again, are creating quite a challenge, and one in which the organizations need to face. Some of the data is coming from within your organization. And I think especially with supply chain data, as we've been through these last few years, we've found that the data is not sufficient to be able to have that transparency. And organizations are focused heavily with respect to how they can improve the digitization of their supply chains in order to get that better information. And that includes on these ESG metrics. The next thing is you've got to go outside your organization to your suppliers. And this is where I think that we're in a time of change, but we're going to get more clarity as we look forward. There are a number of different frameworks for how you measure decarbonization, how you measure, net zero, getting to net zero, and the mechanisms with which you get there. And so I think organizations need to be clear with their suppliers with respect to how they plan to measure and the data that will be required to get to those measurements. And I think as consumers and stakeholders, we have to understand that it's going to take a little bit of time before we get this exactly right, because we need the people with the skills to be able to measure, and we need to measure on a scale that we haven't had to measure in the past.
I could imagine corporate executives saying to you, we have more immediate problems on our plate, more specifically fixing broken supply chains right now. But I'm wondering if you could frame that in a positive way and say that because as companies attempt to do that, that opens up the opportunity to reflect and review your ESG policies at the same time. Can it all be done at once?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that there is a real urgency to do it all at once.
Mhm.
On one side, you've got new regulation that is putting into place new requirements and potential for hefty fines if you get things wrong. And then you also have the expectations of your consumers and your employee base. And the expectations, particularly as you look at Gen Z, who is an important part of our employee base these days, and it's much higher than it was in the past. And we've got a great shortage of talent. So if you're an organization that is on the forefront, you're going to be able to build more trust with your consumers and you're going to be able to attract more talent. You also are at a point, as you mentioned, where we know that change and transformation has to happen in supply chains. So it's not a matter of reworking something that's already in place and working well. It's a matter of planning for sustainability as you look forward in your supply chain transformation.
So no excuses. That's what we're really talking about here. Companies must move forward on ESG compliance and policies. Amy Brachio of EY, thank you so much for joining me for these few minutes to talk about how we can get a new perspective and really move forward and make progress in this critical area. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me and for covering this important topic.